What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And this week we are back with more of The Gathering Storm by Django Wexler. This week specifically we are reviewing Chapter 3. My quick review at the top, this one was good. I enjoyed it. I think that the cliffhanger ending is intriguing and interesting, and it served to answer a lot of questions. There were a lot of interesting and cool moments and cute moments, wholesome moments. So I enjoyed this one. I don't know that I can necessarily compare it to the first and second one and say better, worse, etc. But I really liked it. If you can find a way to read it, it's definitely, I think, worth your time. What about you?
Definitely worth your time, I think.
Yeah. So if you can figure out a way to do it, I would search The Gathering Storm by Django Wexler. I know that there's a link that you can follow to sign up for the newsletters, but I don't know how that works in terms of, like, at the top of all of the articles that are released, it will say, you know, if you missed last week's, click here. So technically, if you do that enough times, you'll get back to Chapter 1, or I guess in this case, Chapter 3. So I recommend that you go look it up before coming here, just so that we're not spoiling the story for you, because we're definitely not going to be doing it justice. We're just going to be reviewing it in and of itself. So,
right.
So yeah, I would encourage you to do that. On to the full review itself. This story, we were back with Ral. So we went from Ral in Chapter 1 to Kaya and Vraska in Chapter 2, and now back to Ral again in Chapter 3, which I had expected for last week, but correctly I was it made sense that I was wrong, because it's chapters in a book. So if there are multiple characters to get to, it makes sense that you would have a cliffhanger-esque, or at least a lead-in at the end of one chapter, then you go to a different chapter, but it does that to make you want to keep reading. So now we are back with Ral, and as we learned, he is going back to the Azorius, and going to the Azorius to try to kind of bring them to the table, so to speak. We see Dovin Bond. That was kind of interesting, because Isperia is still alive, so there's that. We kind of know that a thing is coming soon. A couple of things, in fact, because Dovin's there and Isperia is there. And we already heard about Vraska in these stories, so at some point all of those elements are going to come together. And we also saw Lavinia this time, covertly meeting with Ral in a park, on a park bench, and saying that she's kind of been outed. So it seems like Azorius as a guild is changing prior to Isperia's death, which I didn't necessarily fully expect. And it'll be interesting to see what comes of that with Isperia's death. You know, is that something that is welcomed because there's a possibility of change, you know, changing back to reasonableness, and then Dovin steps in? Or is it a sign of the end for the Azorius, and kind of everybody else knows that? It'll be interesting to see that. But, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. I, again, really, really appreciate the pattern that these stories take, where they start with a full description of the place where we are, where the character is located. So in this case, that's New Prov for the Azorius. We get full descriptions of what it looks like, of the tower, of the Azorius Guild in general. And I wrote, and then Amy will be able to jump in here with her thoughts on this as well, but I wrote that these chapters, these stories for The Gathering Storm, seem to be an amazing introduction to Ravnica in general. It seems to me, if I try to look at this from the lens of a new reader, someone new to Magic Story, this seems incredible. This seems like exactly what you would want to introduce someone to one of Magic's most popular planes, because it really takes the time to give you descriptions of the locales, but also the guilds and what their roles are in the world of Ravnica in particular. Now, with that being said, Amy, what was your point on that, or branching off of that, with regard to how good these stories are for that reason?
Yeah, I mean, the stories are really good. They're definitely a great precursor to the novel in terms of giving a lot of explanation of things that we didn't find out from the novel.
Right.
So what's frustrating about the fact that this story came out after the novel is that it came out after the novel.
Mm-hmm.
They call this a prequel story because I assume it had a deadline that was supposed to be before the novel and just wasn't.
Yep.
It's disappointing because it definitely would have made reading the novel more pleasurable, I guess, and give you an understanding that you don't have until you read this, and an appreciation that you don't have until you read this. And the thing that really sucks is that it's so hard to get to read this. You basically have to beg wizards for the privilege to read these stories.
Right. Which, as I believe you have said in the past, I don't recall if it is on or off camera, whether it was on JaAR or in a private discussion, but it really just means that it's only the hardcore Vorthos who would have any access to this in the first place,
Right.
and or people that are told by the hardcore Vorthos, here, read this.
Right.
Because I was talking to a friend of ours who was talking about, like, hey, I'm interested in getting into the stories. What do I do? I was like, well, the stories that are out right now are really interesting. I don't know how to get it for you, except for you to, subscribe to this newsletter. And then I was like, or I could just forward you the emails, because we get the emails with the chapters in them. So at that point, I'll just forward the email on to him and he can read it himself. And then you don't have to subscribe to this newsletter so that this third party just has your contact information now.
Right.
Thanks, Wizards. But, for contracting that out. But, you can get this along to other people. So, I mean, that's my recommendation for how to do it. I don't know. I don't know of a better way. And if people do know, please feel free to chime in and say, hey, by the way, you can do it this way. It's easy enough. We're totally open to hearing about that as well.
But it's just yet, in my mind, another way that Wizards has become very separated from their ability to effectively market. Because the people who would really benefit from these stories, I think, are the people who are trying to get into, for the first time, reading the Magic stories.
I agree.
And yet the only people who really have access to it are the people who are already familiar.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah. I think, unfortunately, that's really neither here nor there for this particular chapter. It just, that description, again, at the beginning of this chapter, reminds you further of the fact that it feels like they're kind of dropping the ball here.
Right.
And, I've said it before and I'll say it again. It really seems like they're spreading themselves in so many different directions that this is just another one of the things that they're doing. They're contracting it out as best as possible. Same thing with the Netflix series, same thing with the comic book. They're just contracting it out, and then if the contractor messes up, they're not really communicating about it. Hence why issue 3 of the Chandra comic just came out today. Even though the first issue of it came out 4 months ago. I might be even underselling that. It could be more. I don't have the exact dates off the top of my head. But issue 3 just came out of 4. This was a 4-issue miniseries, and I feel like it's been out for months. Months and months and months. So
it's hard as a Vorthos to feel like a company cares.
Well, and again,
because it's just like they're seeming to put, I don't know, they're putting one egg in every basket.
Yeah,
and
that's something that we've talked about in the past, and I do apologize for branching off topic slightly for that. We can talk about that more in the future, and to be fair, we've also pretty extensively talked about it in the past. So, for this chapter, which we did say was good and that we enjoyed, we also had, I didn't mention this earlier, but with Ral going to see the Azorius, when he gets there, the Azorius, being Isperia and Dovin and a couple of the other menial advisors, are meeting with members of the Boros Legion, namely, or most notably, Aurelia, the guildmaster, the angel of the Boros. Which was great. Always cool to see Aurelia, especially we get a story with Ral, Aurelia, and Isperia all together.
Yeah.
Dovin's there too, which is important, arguably, but at least these three are what you would think of as like good, noble guild leaders of the guilds of Ravnica. So it was cool to see them interacting with one another. And except one of the things is you kind of noted, and I noticed it as well, Aurelia, a little snippy, a little snooty in this story.
Yeah.
But the cool thing there, and what I think that does is, it shows the full unrest among the guilds, where it's like, they're all kind of, it's like a big pissing contest.
Yeah.
With all of them, like Aurelia saying, well, you know, with, whatchamacallit, at one point, Ral mentions the fact that Niv Mizzet wants to become Guild Pact, or modify the Guild Pact so he can take some of its power, so that he can be there to challenge Nicol Bolas. And Aurelia kind of alludes to the fact that...
Alludes? I mean, basically, the only thing that she says is... well, he's not going to be able to be objective because...
Well, not even objective. She just makes the comment that him gaining the Guild Pact abilities isn't any better than her and Isperia, for example,
right,
combining together to take down Nicol Bolas themselves. She's like, why is he any better? I could beat Niv Mizzet, and one dragon is as another. Which is... I can understand pride.
Yeah.
Right? And especially for a Boros, that makes sense. I just think that that's interesting to me, is that they have no idea, right? Which, again, makes sense because... But they also...
Well, but that's kind of the point, too.
Right.
Like, it makes a lot more sense for them in this story to be like, they're underestimating Bolas.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Because then when the following story comes out, and it tells you how hard it is to beat Bolas,
yeah,
you're like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yet another reason why it doesn't make sense that this story came out later than the novel.
Right. Well, yeah. And they even talk about, which is nice, again, it's a good rationale for it being a good introduction for someone new to the Magic stories, is that they discuss planeswalkers. Ral reveals what planeswalkers are to Aurelia and Isperia, and or they discuss it really, and I mean Dovin's there as well, talking about his knowledge of Nicol Bolas, and the fact that, you know, he's going to be an invader from another plane, and what that means. And then there's the explanation from Ral, or in his head to us really, that it's kind of an unspoken rule among planeswalkers that you don't talk about being planeswalkers. It's like Fight Club. Those are the first and second rules, is that you don't talk about being a planeswalker. Because the general populace kind of can't handle it. Right. And they kind of all understand that, but yet because of the fact that there's this extraplanar threat, the bigger, more powerful entities on Ravnica are now having to figure it out, because they're under attack soon, and so they need to kind of be brought up to speed. So it's a little bit of a... Oh God, I didn't mean to do this, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's a bit of a shock to Ral's system, that's just a typical topic of discussion now. Sorry, I really didn't do it on purpose, I swear. I ran with it once I did, but so yeah, it was a bit of a shock to his system that they're just talking about planeswalkers now like it's nothing, despite the fact that he was very often working on not having that be a thing that people just knew about.
Right.
So there's that.
No, but I mean, that's true for any planeswalker. It's not like...
Correct. Well, that's why he said it's
Yeah.
like an unspoken rule.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, and as we know from the novel, then you have a group of planeswalkers getting together with a group of Ravnikins and just talking about it like it's no big deal because now they're in a war, and so it somewhat, at that point, the secret keeping kind of goes out the window for good reason. Then we move on to kind of the second third, if you will, of this story, and that is the interactions with Ral and Tomek, which are adorable. Absolutely amazing. There's so much realism in what they're going through and allusions back to the real world, but also then tying it back to the world of Ravnica and Magic and Magic the Gathering, where you have these two lovers, these two who are in a relationship, bonding over the food that they're eating together. And I mean, I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but just the whole idea of the fact that so many different gatherings of people, whether it's on a date or a group of friends or whatever, it very often centers around a meal of some kind. And so this is these two sitting down to their meal at the end of a long day, discussing their day, being with one another, but also bonding over their differences in preference with regard to the food that they're eating. Because Ral picked up curry on the way home, or Tomek picked up curry on the way home. Ral did, thank you. And Ral got his super, super spicy, and Tomek got his much more mild. And that's a real world thing where, you can look at the other person and go, I do not know how you can eat that. It's like, whatever, you enjoy what you enjoy, I'm going to be over here, but I'm not tasting it. Right. I have no idea. I don't want to know anything about it. Good for you, but I'll be over here.
Okay,
right?
Bye.
Right. And then Django Wexler does an amazing job of tying it back to, don't forget though, this is a mythical world or a fantasy world, and says that the reason that Ral likes spicy food is that he spent a long time with Viashino, who are lizard people. And so they ate spicy foods and they were in a warm, hot environment, whatever. And, for Ral, it wasn't a huge deal that it was like volcanically hot. Mm-hmm. You, Amy, also alluded to the fact that, he also has lightning abilities. And so, with the ability to kind of call lightning down or harness lightning, maybe you don't care as much about a little bit of spice or even a lot of bit of spice.
Yeah.
But it jumps back and forth between real world realism and then it's in the Magic story. So you would think that two people who live together, who are in a relationship with one another, and who are now sharing a meal at the end of a long day of working, would be able to freely discuss what they did during their day, especially in a world that is so well understood. I mean, obviously, Ral is a member of the Izzet, and Tomek is a member of the Orzhov, but they all understand, or they each understand how all of the guilds work.
Right.
So they could say, Tomek could say, oh, a lot of tithes being picked up today, or a lot of debts being owed, and etc. Right. And Ral could talk about all the experiments and plans and missions and stuff. And that's where the real world comes into play, because if you have two people and they have different jobs or different hobbies or different things that they do during the day, when they come together, they can then discuss those things and share in their different experiences to have their conversations. But it ties it back to Ravnica because they don't do that. They just say, oh, guild business, and they gloss over it entirely. Why? Because because they need to keep the fact that they are together a secret. Which again, that's more tropey, just the concept of like, two lovers that are forbidden love or whatever, and they're being kept apart. I mean, it is. That's classic Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story-esque stuff. But this tones it down a lot, which I appreciated, because it's not like, oh my god, I can't believe we're doing this, like trying to have that be the basis of their relationship, and it's not. It's just an aspect of it. And I don't know. I like the fact that we talked then about, when we were reading this, you asked, and we kind of went back and forth on talking about the fact that why does it matter that the two of them are in different guilds? Like, who cares? And I kind of proposed, I was like, well, they're both in pretty high-ranking positions. Tomek is like the right-hand man of Teza, who's the heir apparent. And it's funny, because I said heir apparent because Teza's grandfather is one of the ghosts. And then the story used the exact same term for her.
Right, and it was like the sentence that he read next.
Right.
After explaining it.
Right. Which I would argue, right, we came up with that question based on what we were reading. Right? We were reading it and we went, but why though? Explain that to us. It doesn't make sense. And we speculated, right? We literally, I stopped reading and we talked about it. And like Amy said, I then go back to the story, and the next sentence I read, or the next paragraph I read, explained the exact situation that we were questioning, which shows amazing writing. Because Django Wexler was able to read his audience in us prior to us having read the story, which is so well done. Super well done. So hats off to you, Django, on that, because it was amazing. I mean, hats off on most things. But that in particular, I really appreciated, where we stopped, we talked about it, and then the next thing we read was about that. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely laughed. I definitely thought that was hilarious. But it was also really great. I mean, like you said, there were... I don't know. There were a lot of aspects of a lot of the more recent stories and the novel and everything else that made you feel like things were a bit disjointed.
Oh, yeah.
And there wasn't that sort of logical through line that just made it flow smoothly that you were expecting to have exist. And so the return of that smooth through line is refreshing.
Oh yeah, very much so. So now on to the final third, if you will, the third of this story, which was the dream sequence that Ral has. And when I first read or noticed that it was going to be a dream sequence, I was a little hesitant, I'll be honest. I was like, ugh, where's this going? What is this going to be? But I was proven very wrong almost immediately, which I really appreciated. It was Ral going back to his childhood.
His teen years.
Right, he's 17 in the flashback, but it's his backstory. And we get to hear a little bit about his mother, a little bit about some of the work that he was doing, and that he came from, a poor or a less well-off upbringing, which is always nice. And again, super humanizing for Ral as a character to have these struggles in his life that he went through when he was younger. And again, a bit of a trope situation where you have that kind of a person being then bullied and beaten down by the wealthy. But it was kind of turned on its head a bit when he is being actively bullied, but again, it's with magic, so it ties it back in. Where the hired hand that the son Gunther has working for him kind of blasts Ral with energy, with force energy, and knocks him backwards and breaks his nose. Mainly just because this well-to-do kid seemed to be just bored, hanging out with his friends and wanted to show off. and so decided to bully the I don't know, the
Rain
poor
mage.
right, the rain mage, but the poor kid who's essentially his dad's servant, and Ral is now beaten down and just trying to lay low, and Gunther and his friends leave and they're laughing or whatever, and this stranger comes up and helps him. And I guess maybe this was predictable to some. I did not see it coming out of anywhere. I was very surprised. I really enjoyed the cliffhanger of the fact that this stranger who walked up introduced himself as Nicol Bolas. And I thought that was awesome. I thought it worked really well. I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since we've seen Nicol Bolas as anything but a big scary dragon, right?
Fair.
It's been a long time since we've seen him in his sort of very detailed, very specific toiling.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that he does.
Yeah.
And his, you know, we've seen him do his manipulations recently, but recently they've been a lot bigger and badder.
Oh yeah. Yeah, a lot larger in scope,
right,
than just helping this poor kid up off the ground and giving him healing magic for his broken nose.
So I mean, the last time we've seen Nicol Bolas sort of seeming this way is probably when we read the twins story.
Oh God, yeah, yeah. I was gonna say Corset 2019
so
stories.
A while
Absolutely.
back.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so this was cool, because it actually wasn't what I expected either.
Right.
But it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and it's it's interesting in that I don't believe Ral is a planeswalker at this point, right? I don't. He if he had sparked, he probably would have been able to just, you know, planeswalk away from that interaction or whatever. But he doesn't talk about that, so it leads me to believe that he hasn't sparked yet. So why is Bolas so interested in him? Does Bolas know he's going to be his planeswalker? Does Bolas see potential in him as a rain mage in possibly taking over one of the guilds in the future? That he's actually that powerful?
I doubt it.
Well, but again, then that's why I question why would he do it? Because like you said, he's so overarching with his schemes, and maybe because this is somewhat in the past, he's not. But when you think about the amount of time that Nicol Bolas has been alive, Ral's time from being 17 to now is not really that long ago in the grand scheme of Nicol Bolas and his abilities.
No, it was very deliberate.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it might have just been an opportunity. He might not have been eyeing Ral. It might have just been an opportunity for him to weasel his way into somebody's life.
Yeah.
And he would find a way to exploit that.
Yeah,
You know
just
what
gather
I mean?
supporters in general or friends or whatever.
Yeah, like, okay, you know, somebody kicked you while you were down, I'm going to pick you up.
Yeah.
And then maybe you'll end up doing me some favors.
That's a fair point. And if this story now has taught us anything, I think that the following stories, not necessarily immediately in chapter 4, but the following chapters in this book will hopefully answer that question for us of why. Why did Bolas approach Ral, or what caused Bolas to approach him in that moment at least, right? Was Bolas able to see his potential in, you know, to come in the future, or was it as Amy suggests that, you know, it's possible that
He saw his vulnerability.
right, exactly, and just is looking for anyone and everyone, or is it something completely different? And if you have ideas, as always, that is what the comment section is for. Join in on the discussion, because it is this was an interesting one for us. This one raised a lot of questions, and like I said, it for some of those questions immediately answered them, and for others it didn't. But this is only chapter 3 of 20, so I'm in no way gonna sit here and say, oh my god, this sucks, you know, They gave us a little bit of information, but not enough, because I'm ready and waiting for the rest of these chapters, unlike what I might have said in the past, where it's like, why didn't they tell us this information? I don't understand why we don't know this or whatever.
Right.
And again, this time it makes sense for us to be a bit in the dark because we're hearing these stories from Ral's perspective. Bolus knows why he's doing it.
Right.
Ral clearly doesn't,
Right.
because it wouldn't make any sense for him to. So for us in Ral's head, we don't know why he's doing it either. And so that makes a lot of sense to me.
Right.
So for this week, I mean, and that is the cliffhanger, right? Is he introduces himself as Nicol Bolas, and that's it. Then that's this week's story. Now next week, will we see Kaya? Will we see Varaska? Will we see Ral? Will we see someone completely different?
Who knows?
It's only chapter 4 next week. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. I'm definitely looking forward to it. And if you have any and all thoughts that you might have on this week's story, where next week's story might be going, we had a little bit of a discussion about it in the beginning, so if you have thoughts on these stories, just getting to talk about the fact that these stories did not come out at the right time,
Right.
Or whether you think that they did, you think it makes sense that they came out after the fact. Please, any and all thoughts that you might have, let us know in the comment section down below. Like I said, that is what it is for, and it's a great way for you to join us in showing off our...
Hashtag for this pride.
Lots of questions, some answers. That's what we can talk about. So thank you all so very much for watching. Please stay tuned to the channel. I teased last week and around this time in the video that we have a lot of things in the works, and we do. There's probably not too big of a snag, but if you follow us on Twitter, you'll see that we had kind of an interesting weekend. So, you know, we will be working. We'll be working through that. Thanks, appreciate it. We'll be working through that, and it shouldn't affect uploads of any kind here. As I said, the other projects that we're working on might be delayed slightly, but we will work on that on our own time, and that is nothing that you need to concern yourselves with. But please feel free to subscribe if you have not already. That button will appear here. You guys know how YouTube works. Comments, likes, follows or subscribes or what have you, and check out our other videos. We will have another video coming out Saturday. We have more videos coming out on Monday, so definitely stay tuned for all of that. But for now, this has been another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.